Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Imperfect Podcast. I'm your host, Kirsten Pfeiffer, and I am joined today by the lovely Sophie Beren. Sophie and I actually met through like a women's group a few months ago, and I've just had the pleasure of getting to know her. She's such a powerhouse and really is so about unifying and empowering not only women, but the next generation, specifically Gen Z. She is the founder and CEO of The Conversationalist, which is dedicated to breaking Gen Zers outside of their echo chambers and unifying the world one voice at a time, which we really need now more than ever. She is incredibly passionate about social impact and was recently named 25 under 25 by Social Entrepreneurs magazine and 21 women entrepreneurs to watch in 2021. You are so impressive, and I am so glad to have you here, Sophie. Welcome.
Kirsten, thank you so much for having me. I feel like I've known you forever, even though we
Yeah.
met on a virtual social media app, and just
Yeah.
so impressed by all that you do. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. And well, first of all, before we dive into the nitty gritty stuff, I just want to say this girl was literally just on a New York Times, I'm butchering it, Times Square. There we go. Times Square billboard for The Conversationalist. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was the craziest day of my life. I still can't believe it happened.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and how it came to be and what the ad was for?
Yeah, of course. So we just launched our very own talk show at The
Amazing.
Conversationalist, which we can get into a little bit later. And we were working with some awesome people who wanted to help us amplify that message. So we
Wow.
got offered the spot. It was up for 24 hours. We showed up
Wow.
that day an hour early to scout out the location. And the minute we got there, the billboard went up. So it went up an
Oh,
hour early and it went up like 10 times in a row and
oh
we were
my gosh.
so all over the place. I started bawling my eyes out, and it was just the
Yeah.
most magical day. And we stayed in Times Square the whole day, watching it and meeting people and bringing people in and out from our community. It was just an
That's
unbelievable experience.
incredible. Literally have the chills right now. Like I said, we only met pretty recently, but it's been such a pleasure to watch your journey and just see you and root you on. So I'm so proud of you. And that was so cool to see that.
And the same goes back to you. So thank you. Thank
Thank you. Yeah. So do you want to explain a little bit more about the conversationalist?
I would love to. So, before I even explain what the conversationalist is, I feel like I need to introduce myself. So,
Go for
thank
it,
you
girl.
again for thank you for that beautiful intro, Kirsten. But the one thing I always like to say when I meet anyone for the first time is that I am a unifier. I feel
Mm.
like I was put on this earth to bring people closer together across differences to have conversations. And so that notion of being a unifier has really carried me throughout my life. And
Mm.
so, most recently, I've created my platform, The Conversationalist, to help me unify the world. And so, The
Mm.
Conversationalist is a nonpartisan educational platform empowering the next generation, Gen Z, to break open their echo chambers and have conversations that matter. So,
Wow.
we do this through a lot of different offerings and products. But, like I mentioned, our main product is our talk show. We just
Mm.
launched the first ever Gen Z talk show called POVs, and we have a few other offerings here or there, whether it be our community network on the Geneva app, as well as a few other content offerings, but all at the end of the day, on a mission to unify the world.
Yeah, that's so amazing, especially because I feel like, I don't know, I'm guilty of this. I complain about, oh, things are so divided right now, and, things are so polarized, and we can get more into this in a little bit, but just trying to come to some kind of common ground with people, even if they don't believe what you believe, I feel really hard to find places where you can do that. And so I think it's really amazing because I know that a lot of people feel that same way, but it's easy to sit there and complain about it. And then it takes a lot to go out there and create a solution for that. So thank you for doing that. And also, where's the talk show? Where is that mostly hosted?
Yeah, great question. And also, Kirsten, thank you for those kind words. You're the best. So, this idea is pretty new. We decided to start the show only a couple of months ago. So, we just finished out a pilot test season, our MVP, on
Wow.
our community app, Geneva. So, we were hosting them live, almost like an Instagram live with multiple Gen Zers every single week talking about hard topics.
Mm.
But after we ran that MVP, we realized that if we're really going to make a splash and make a Gen Z talk show, the first ever Gen Z talk
Mm.
show, we want to go big. And I feel like I spend so much time thinking about, well, in an ideal world, we would be doing X, Y, and Z, or if only we could do X, Y, and Z. And I kind of snapped at
Mm.
myself the other day because I thought, Sophie, if you're really going to do this, you've got to really do it and go
Mm.
big.
Mm.
So we're gearing up to film our show in person in an
Wow.
actual studio with real people face to face. And so we're gearing up for that filming now to start in October. So
That
we're
is
hoping to
amazing.
launch. Thank you. We're hoping to launch season 1 in January, and it will be on our website and YouTube, and the audio will be distributed as well across different platforms. But
Yeah.
right now, we're just really fine tuning the vision of how we can make this show happen in the face to face space.
Yeah. Wow, that is so incredible. And I feel like it's easy to find like excuses and part of the reason why the name of this podcast is Imperfect is because I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I think perfectionism, it can serve you when you try to do things well, which you do things very well, but a lot of times it gets in the way of like just going for it. And so like you were saying of like, oh, I wish I could have it like X, Y, and Z, and then and I'm speaking because I do this all the time, and I get caught in this little space where I feel stuck, but like I'm putting those constraints on myself. No one else is. So it's really cool to see you going for it. And like you said, just making a splash. And what are some ways that you've kind of, overcome maybe some of those voices in your head of like, I wish I could have it this way, but I'm going to do it anyway?
Whew, well, Kirsten, you do not have to tell me twice. I am also a fellow recovering perfectionist. It's something I struggle with every single day. And I think
Mm.
there are constant voices in my head at different phases throughout my life. And I think the biggest voice that has come up for me time and time again throughout my childhood and all the way up until now is that I don't have a voice and that my voice
Mm.
doesn't matter. I feel like
Mm.
I'm constantly fighting those voices in my head, and it's definitely an uphill battle, but I
Yeah.
think if anything, I've learned to overcome it through putting myself out there. I
Mm.
really try to take risks and be that person to really be bold and daring and just try. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in a lot of ways that has helped me get out of my own way, but by no means have I conquered it.
Mm.
But what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally relate to that. I think that I don't, and we actually, one of our rooms that we did on Clubhouse was about imposter syndrome. And so I think that comes down to the root of a lot of like our fears and those voices in our head saying, oh, you're not, like you don't have a voice, your voice doesn't matter, you can't do this. And kind of that mentality of like, I need to have all my ducks in a row and then I'll be, I'll feel good about myself. And I think, like you said, just the practice of putting yourself out there, it's really just a muscle. And the more you do it, the thing that you thought was so scary, like the worst that's going to happen doesn't happen. And that doesn't mean that you don't fall down sometimes and make mistakes, but through that you learn and you grow. And I mean, even like this podcast, I started it in my bedroom on like Zoom, and that was fun. It's just like I had to just take that step, and now, it's just kind of like, how do we refine it from there? And you learn more about yourself and really what your vision is in the process. I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't plan and take time. And I think it's really a fine balance between just like going out there and releasing something versus really nurturing something and being intentional about it. But I think the more that I've really just kind of went for it, because I think like I'm someone that by nature overanalyzes things. So even when I feel like I'm doing something prematurely or spontaneously, usually like my version of that is still pretty well thought out. So I think it really just comes down to being honest with yourself and even recognizing that those thoughts are in your head, those like limiting voices, because it can become this soundtrack that you don't even realize it's playing and limiting you. So like limiting beliefs are a big thing too to kind of conquer.
Completely. And Kirsten, that's why I love what you do. I mean, the fact that you were willing to lean in to something that is so vulnerable for you, the fact that you
Mm,
struggle with perfectionism and you
mm,
channeled it in to a platform where you're actually breaking that down and fighting against it every day is incredible. And I
oh,
think we connect on so many levels because we share that struggle. And I think
yeah.
something I've learned through the conversationalist as we try to help the next generation have these hard conversations
Mm,
is that oftentimes we think conversations are a two-way street, but actually some of the best and most profound conversations happen one-on-one with yourself.
mm,
And I think
yeah.
we forget to really entertain those voices in our head, lean into them, dig into them, and break them down.
Mm,
And I think the more that we can actually have conversations with ourselves, the better off we'll be to then start facing those issues head on in the
yeah.
outside world.
That is so powerful and very profound too. And I think when you look at like the echo chambers and the tension and the division, a lot of it comes down to we're not willing to listen. And if we're not listening to ourselves, like you said, and taking that one-on-one intentional time, how do we think we're actually going to listen to anyone else? I think we're just in this like hyper reactive culture where everyone's scared. It's like a really scary time. Not like I don't even have to say that. Things, I think anytime there's change and instability, people react differently than they would. And so if we can get to this place of like checking in with ourselves and spending that time listening to those voices and listening to what is it about the chaos of what's going on in the world right now that's like triggering me, and instead of putting that nervous energy out to other people and like getting into these like fights on Instagram in the comment section, I think that you can then listen to other people and just try to understand where they're coming from. Doesn't, like I said before, it doesn't mean you have to agree, but I've found anytime that you engage with other points of view, if nothing else, it just makes your point of view more nuanced and it makes you understand why it is that you believe what you believe.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. This is like why I get out of bed every day, just trying
Yeah.
to help people realize that it's just that simple. You know,
Yeah.
we're so afraid to lean into those hard conversations because we're afraid of confrontation or the possibility that we might have our views or our minds changed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the wrong intention. Conversations
Yeah.
are not had to change someone else. It's really just
Mm-hmm.
to better understand other people, listen more than you speak, ask questions,
Yeah.
and you may be pleasantly surprised that maybe you consider something you've never considered before or
Mm-hmm.
reaffirm your own belief system. And so
Yeah.
I wish more people realize that. I think we'd have
Yeah.
so many less problems in the world if we could all have that same intention going into conversations.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, like what would you define that intention as if we like really distill it down? I think I've heard this so many times in different variations, but like it's instead of listening, or sorry, instead of having a conversation to be right, like having a conversation to listen, or like what would that be for you? What do you think like a healthy intention would be going into a conversation?
So I love what you said. I think going into a conversation with the intention of listening more than you speak, trying to understand and be understood is important. But the way that I would dwindle it down is if if you want to have a productive, meaningful conversation, you should enter into a mutual agreement with the other person you're talking to that you are going to listen to that person as passionately as you feel about
Mm,
being heard yourself.
mm,
And so I
yeah,
think that is the golden rule of conversations. And I think we miss that a lot of times. We're always
yeah,
preparing our next thought, we're
yeah,
trying to be in a million places at once. And
mm,
we forget that it's a two-way street, right? Like if
yeah.
you put that passion and effort and energy into hearing someone else, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
give that back to you.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I am by no means calling myself like an amazing listener. So that's like the preface of what I'm about to say. But I try to be in my acting. It's funny. In acting, like one of the first things that they have you do in training is learning how to actively listen to the other person. Because when you see bad acting, it's usually the person's just doing their lines and they're not really listening and reacting to the other person. And so if you think about that in real life, like if someone's not really present and listening, it's because they're just doing their lines that they've prepared in their head. And it's like the better actor that I've become, the more it really, really ticks me off when I can tell that someone's not listening to me and they're just nodding, yeah, uh-huh. And it's like you're not actively listening, and that's okay. But I think that the more that really opened up my eyes to how many times I even am not being present with someone in my real life and I'm just like not actively listening, because it takes energy, it takes vulnerability, and sometimes, like you said, if it's a harder conversation, it takes confrontation. And I don't think anyone enjoys confrontation. I mean, actually that's wrong. I think some people are like on the Enneagram, there's the challenger and they like to but most people I've found don't really enjoy confrontation. But every time I've had to have a conversation where it feels confrontational, I feel like the freedom on the other side of that, like it just alleviates anxiety of whatever that thing is that I'm scared to confront. It's usually because there's some kind of anxiety that is surrounding me and that interaction with the person. And like as soon as I confront it, there's so much freedom on the other side of that. So I don't know, have you had a hard time when you feel like you're having to have confrontational conversations?
Oh my God, always. And it makes sense, right? Like change is scary. And I think one of the biggest pieces of having hard conversations is committing yourself to getting comfortable with what is
Mm,
inherently uncomfortable. And
yeah.
so I struggle with this, and so does everyone else who constantly has these conversations in our community. But I think something that's important to recognize is where we get it wrong. I think
Mm,
when we enter these hard conversations, we sometimes assume that the other person is equally as ready to have it.
mm,
And
mm,
so, something I've learned over the past couple years is something that I've now coined as conversational consent. Meaning, if I really want to have a hard conversation with someone, I may think that now is the perfect moment. I'm just going to start, I'm going to throw that person in off the deep end and just
mm,
have the conversation right then and there.
yeah.
But a lot of times those conversations fail because the other person wasn't ready. You caught them
Yeah.
off guard. They're immediately on the defense. They don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
handle themselves. And that
Mm-hmm.
confrontation feels really scary. But what I've
Yeah.
tried to do, which may seem a little weird at first, but once you get into it, it's less uncomfortable. I sometimes ask the person point blank if they're ready to have it. Like, hey,
Mm,
Kirsten, there's something that's been on my mind. I would love to talk to you about it, but this may not be the best time for you. Is now a good time? And if that
mm,
person says yes, great, go for it. But if that person says no, then you can say, totally fine. Like, let me know when you're ready, or can we find a time to have it? And
mm-hmm.
I think setting that boundary, but also that intention is
Yeah.
super helpful so that you maximize your conversation for success.
Yeah, that is so powerful, because I feel like in that too, it's such a simple step, but it creates intentionality and it creates a safe space for that person, so that if you are going to have the conversation now, they know that you're actually looking out for their best interest. And because where that defensiveness comes from, I think usually is us trying to protect ourselves. And so when the other person, or if you're the one initiating the conversation, when you come at it from a point of I'm considering you and I'm wanting what's best for you, I think automatically the other person's walls and defenses come down and it creates a safe space. Or like you said, if they're not ready for that, they can mentally prepare for it. And and then if they don't, what would you do? I don't know if you've ever been in this situation where you've asked someone, are you ready to have this conversation? They say no, and then they don't follow up. Has that ever happened to you?
All the time. But I think it's important for you to follow up because you have to
Mm,
remember you're the one that wanted to have it in the first place. So it's
mm-hmm.
on you to follow up. But if that person just does not want to have it, you keep following up, you keep trying, at one point or another, that person just might not be ready at this period in time. Maybe it needs
Mm,
to happen months from now, years from now. You don't know.
yeah.
But what I would do as a follow up would be to ask if there's another way that we could communicate without
Mm,
necessarily needing to have a sit down conversation. Something
mm,
that I've experimented with is voice notes or sending an email, finding a way to
mm,
get my thoughts down on paper in a way that can be received by the other person if it can't be via face to
yeah.
face.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And what I love about that too is I feel like you're utilizing this technology that could and is creating a lot of problems in us having conversations, right? And like kind of hiding behind our screens and not really having those points of true connection. But you're using it for good. And I think like any technology or anything that can be used for bad or create problems can also be used for good. So that's a really cool way to like be like, well, there's so many forms of communication out there. What works best for you and how can I connect with this person?
Boundaries are so important. But what I will say is at the end of the day, and this is my personal take, I think there is a benefit to having virtual communication, like sending an email or writing on social media, but I don't think anything will compare to the power of face to face. And so,
Yeah.
for anyone who maybe is considering writing an email instead of having the hard conversation via voice,
Mm-hmm.
I would just really encourage that person to let the other person know that things can be misconstrued.
Yeah.
You may not fully understand my point of view through reading my sentences, but hey, this is a great starting point. So if you have
Yeah.
questions for me, I would so appreciate you to follow up. I don't want you to
Mm-hmm.
assume everything about me based on the things that I'm writing down on paper, because I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes through texting or social media, things get really easily misconstrued, which is
Yeah.
definitely one of the limiting pieces of socials.
Absolutely. And I think when you're so crystal clear in your communication like that, then you leave it all on the table for, whatever happens, whatever the outcome is of the situation. I know that I have communicated clearly my point of view. And if the other person doesn't receive that well, or they don't want to engage further, I think, I don't know, one of the things that's really hard for me personally is sometimes I attach my self-worth to how those interactions go. And a lot of times it's not always necessarily a reflection of you, how that other person reacts. A lot of times it's something that they're going through, but we still have to hold up the mirror and be like, okay, where could I have been better in this? And getting back to what we were saying before about like not being perfect, every one of these interactions is an opportunity to grow and learn as a communicator and as a human being, just trying to connect and unify.
Completely. I mean, that's the inner perfectionist in us
Yeah.
struggling to get out. And I think, even though it may sound very PC, I think the more intentions you can set for a conversation, the better. Because what
Mm-hmm.
it does is it equals the playing field. It
Mm-hmm.
makes the other person feel like you, again, are looking out for them. You know exactly what you want out of the conversation, and you've had
Mm-hmm.
time to prepare. And so I think it's important to just do as much as you can to maximize all of the factors to
Mm-hmm.
create the best possible conversation. And so,
Yeah.
one of those pieces is looking inward at yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but also recognizing that at the end of the day, the only thing you have control over is you. And so, just
Mm-hmm.
remembering, which we already spoke about, but I want to double click on, the purpose of conversation is to not change the other person.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just to understand and foster empathy for another person's experience that is different from your own. So,
Yeah.
if we can go into those conversations with all of those different intentions, but also
Mm-hmm.
knowing for yourself that you're not setting out to change someone's mind or bring them over to your side, you're
Mm-hmm.
also setting really good expectations for yourself.
Yeah, that's amazing. I actually, it's reminding me of this book that I've been reading, and the title is interesting, but it's called Keep Your Love On. And it's like a very corny name, but my friend recommended it to me, and it's so good. It's this guy who's talking about relationships, both romantically and not, and how in every relationship, we're always either working towards connection or disconnection. Like there's really no in between, even though consciously you might not be aware of it. But so much of this reminds me of even when it's difficult, like if you're putting that intentionality into it, you're working towards connection. And he references a lot of times how, if you look at like older married couples that like have no communication in their relationships anymore, it's at some point they made a decision to work towards disconnection because it was just too hard or too painful to try to work through those confrontations. And so they just kind of get into this like self-preservation mode where as long as we stay like keep this in my little bubble and your little bubble, and this kind of translates back to the echo chambers. It's a lot easier and safer to stay with my people that are all telling me the same things that I believe, but it's so much more powerful and edifying to really cross the bridge and work towards connection, whether it be in your romantic relationship or in other echo chambers. And I know obviously that's like part of your mission statement is echo chambers. So I would love to talk a little bit more about that too.
Oh my gosh, 100%. And Kirsten, it seems like you're in my head. Like these are all the things I'm thinking about on a daily basis. And what's pretty wild is that there's actual science that backs up what you were sharing. The
Mm.
echo chamber isn't just a new term of the 21st century. There's
Mm-hmm.
network theory and a lot of communication research all around why we as human beings tend to surround ourselves with people who look like us and think like us. It's called
Mm-hmm.
birds of a feather. It's
Yep.
fascinating because it's comfortable to stay insular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how we were in prehistoric times. It was
Yeah.
looking out for the people in your immediate circle. And
Mm-hmm.
through time, we've just been self-selecting. And
Yeah.
so the echo chamber is not a new problem, but I think it's super interesting that not a lot of people know it exists. I
Yeah.
think outside of the people who have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, which is an
So,
amazing
so
film,
good.
there aren't a lot of people who recognize how dangerous the echo chamber has become. And
Mm.
I think it's such an easy concept to wrap your head around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we surround ourselves both IRL and online with groups of people who share our same ideologies. And the
Mm-hmm.
more and more we follow people who have the same beliefs as us, hang out with the people who have the same beliefs as us, the less opportunity we have to really understand the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not reality to only be surrounded by people who think like you. And
Yeah.
so I'm such a believer in that the moment when you realize the rest of the world doesn't think like you,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you grow. And so
Absolutely.
I wear that
Yeah.
on a quote on my ring every single day to remind me of that
Yeah.
because that's what we should be striving for. And even
Yeah.
though it feels uncomfortable, it's like what you said earlier, Kirsten. A lot of us don't even know what lies beyond our own
Mm-hmm.
echo chambers, but it's so liberating once you get there. And
Yeah.
so there's just got to be a little leap of faith. But once you do it, even in the smallest of ways, you'll be so much happier for it. And the
Yeah.
easiest way to start is just by following people on social media who are outside of your own circles. Find
Yeah.
someone who thinks differently than you do about one particular issue you're passionate about, or following people from another country, another geographical location. Just start somewhere and
Mm-hmm.
then at least start reversing the trends in the
Yeah.
areas that you have control over.
Yeah, that's amazing. It all comes back to baby steps and progress, not perfectionism. And, it's interesting that you bring up how it really is not an echo chambers are not a new thing. It's like from the beginning of time, like it's something that's existed. And I'm going to reveal my like psychology nerd here, but in college, like I took this class, but it was basically about how we're in an evolutionary mismatch because our genes have evolved during the caveman time for certain survival things that, we needed. So for example, when food was so scarce then, our genes evolved to crave fatty and sugary foods because you would maybe go days without eating and your body needed to store that as fat so that you would survive. And now we have an abundance of food around us and we crave sweets and fattening foods. Like there's a reason why it tastes good to us because our brain is sending us those signals to make us survive. And so then when you look at everything as a survival tactic, those groups of people, like having a small group of people that are like you, that tribe mentality helped them survive in the caveman era. And there's also Malcolm Gladwell has a book called The Tipping Point, and he talks about how, when they look at memory and even just like social communication, our brains really only have the capacity to keep up with like, I don't know, I'm going to butcher this, but it's like less than 70 people. And so if you think about our networks and I think we all are connected or by second degrees have more than 70 people in our life to some capacity. it's really hard to like keep up with them on like an emotional individual level. And we're not expected to keep up with everyone, but I think because our brains have like protected us of like, oh, I'm only going to keep up with this amount of people, then it makes it hard for us to look at the people outside of that, say it's 70, look at them as like a human being and part of your tribe. And again, you don't have to be best friends with them, but I think just understanding how our brains, even though they're amazing and do so many things to protect us, sometimes they might be driving us in a way that, you know, we're not in the caveman era anymore. And we have to look at what are some ways that like our learned behaviors are subconsciously driving us into maybe not so healthy patterns in our society.
Oh my goodness. And
Yeah.
I need to read that book by
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell, but
It's so good. And the other book, sorry, I'm going to throw this in there too, because that professor that I took that class in, he's not sponsoring me to say this. I haven't talked to him since I graduated, but his book, it's called Mean Genes. He wrote a book about this, and it's so fascinating just to like study our everyday. I can do a whole podcast on that, but it's really, really fascinating. And so, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, you know so much about this issue. So it's like really refreshing to talk about it with someone who gets it. And it's just really interesting to understand how these issues that we're facing now in 2021 aren't new. And we're
Mm-hmm.
just trying to find new ways to solve them because
Yeah.
they're embedded in our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way that our ancestors used to self-preserve. And so
Right.
it's just really fascinating to think about.
Yeah. And I think so many of these issues, like you said, they're age-old issues. And even, you know, the pandemic, like there have been other pandemics before. There have been like everything that's happened in the last year and a half has happened before. But I think that like our social media and our access to information is what's profound about it, because it really exacerbates like the pain and the chaos of that, because our brains were not meant to handle that amount of information. It's a huge burden. And so sometimes I have to take breaks from social media, and you know, as much as I like to be engaged with people and having conversations and transparency, like sometimes I think for our mental health we have to take a step back and realize like we're not really meant to take all this information in all the time.
Completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about just the
Yeah.
ways in which we lead our lives nowadays that, don't add up with the way things have been done in the past, but
Mm-hmm.
there are solutions that I think we don't often seek out. And so
Yeah.
what I love about the work that you're doing is that you're actually going out to solve them. And
Mm.
I try to do that every day because we
Yeah.
fall into these patterns that,
Yeah.
we sometimes can't find our way out of. Like how you
Mm-hmm.
shared about trying to spend time off of social media. I can't remember a day where I've gone without social media in the
Mm.
past maybe 2, 3 years, but I feel
Wow.
like I need it because
Mm.
of the work that I'm doing. And I
Yeah.
like being connected. And I know that that's bad for me, but I have a
Mm-hmm.
really hard time breaking it. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting how we can analyze those patterns in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever have
Right.
tips for me, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not perfect in it either, but I think like you said, just like analyzing the trend in your life, like having, I think a lot of the issues that come when we have like mental health issues or really anything, it's because we're not aware of what's going on under the surface. So I think what you said is really powerful, is like being aware and analyzing and then making a choice. Well, you know, I know maybe it would be better for me to take a step off of social media, but like my business needs this today. And so finding other ways to create that space and that mental break for yourself, and boundaries, so that you can still take care of yourself, so you can pour into the community that you're creating. And I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit to just like the business side of what you are doing, because you're so inspiring as an entrepreneur. And I've just, like I said, I've gotten the pleasure of watching you grow and flourish and continue to expand your business. And so I'd love to pick your brain a little bit on like the process behind that, and really like what personally led you to want to even dedicate your life to starting The Conversationalist.
Yeah, it all goes back to where I was brought up. I was raised in Wichita, Kansas, in the Midwest, and Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, for most of my life, really didn't believe that I had a voice. I was
Mm,
always taking risks, putting myself out there, doing everything I could to make a difference, but I was never awarded the validation that I wanted in order to keep doing it. I thought you had to
mm,
be student body president in order to be deemed,
mm,
worthy of being a leader. And so my whole life I felt shut down. And
mm.
so when I got to college, I traveled, through the yellow brick road to the University of Pennsylvania and quickly realized that that was again a limiting belief that I had. It was a
Mm,
voice in my head. And finally being outside of my own echo chamber in the Midwest, I was able to see the world from my own
mm.
eyes. And so
Yeah.
realizing that I had a voice all along was really the spark behind The
Mm,
Conversationalist. And it took a few turns. I started another venture before TC, but
mm,
really the impetus behind starting The Conversationalist was wanting to create a destination and a place for our entire generation to come to in
mm,
order to celebrate their unique voice.
mm.
And
Yeah.
I never wanted any young person to feel the way that I felt again growing up. So
Yeah.
that was really the spark behind what the vision of the conversationalist is. And then through, starting another venture before TC, I really felt like I had the tools to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And this might be a tricky question, but I just would like to hear your perspective on it. For someone that's struggling with feeling like they don't have a voice, I think even nowadays, like that not being elected student body president, like the version of that, I feel like in adulthood with social media is not having a ton of followers. So who cares what I have to say or whatever that might narrative might be for someone that really has a point of view and wants to share it, but maybe has some of those limiting beliefs and doesn't feel like they have a voice. What would your advice be to them to really start to kind of step into their power?
This is something that even I struggle with to this
Mm-hmm.
day. But I think something that's helped me over the years is really trying to identify what I care about most in this world. I think having those conversations with ourselves that we talked about a little bit ago is the perfect place to start because I think confidence is a huge piece of the puzzle of really making your voice heard and stepping into your power. So
Mm-hmm.
I would start by asking yourself some questions about why you believe what you believe in. Where do your beliefs come from? What are the things that get you out of bed every day? And
Mm-hmm.
what do you care about most? And I think
Yeah.
once you identify those factors, you can start better understanding the answers to your questions. And
Yeah.
so that will lead to confidence, which I believe is one of the biggest pieces of talking and using your voice and getting yourself out there. But I think it's also important to know your audience and
Mm-hmm.
channel a lot of the tips that we already talked about. Stepping into your power requires knowing who you want to communicate with.
Mm-hmm.
When is the right time to use your voice, how to be heard, and then
Mm-hmm.
in the middle space, find ways to make others feel heard. So when it's your turn, they'll listen to you. So
Yeah.
I think it's being a powerful, active listener, going
Mm-hmm.
out to make people feel special and seen and heard and valued, and
Mm-hmm.
then finding the right time and place and moment to share your voice with another
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I love what you said too. I think it's a really important point to focus on empowering other people. Like if you want to feel empowered and you want people to celebrate you and like lift you up, I think it's really important to realize, are you doing that to people around you too? Because in that process, you, by encouraging other people, you are practicing your voice. That is influence. I think sometimes we think of influence as only being on a public platform, but influence is in our interpersonal relationships and in really lifting up the people around us. So that's one way to do it. And then that starts to get, like, no pun intended, but echoed back to you. Like you're practicing that connection. And I know that you talk about that in The Conversationalist, like that there's so much power through human connection, through conversation. And so if you're communicating with other people and really doing your best to like edify them and build them up, then you're creating a community around you before you know it. That's the culture. And I think that for me, finding my voice, and like you said, I struggle with it all the time. But what's really been so transformative for me is finding community, like healthy community around me to sometimes not only like encourage me, but tell me when maybe I've missed the mark on something, or tell me and be on, and it's out of love because they care about my personal development. And also to pull out, like to point out different gifts in each other, like sometimes your point of view on yourself is so limited, and sometimes it takes other people holding up the mirror to you. But the way to get that like healthy community, I think, starts with looking how you can really pour into the people around you in your life. And so I love that that's also another huge aspect of the conversationalist, is not just conversation, but community, because you really can't have one without the other.
So true. And thank you for saying that, Kirsten. You're bringing up something for me that I want to share, which is anytime I'm interacting with a new person, in order to better understand them, I kind of play a game with myself. I don't know if you're a believer of love languages, but
Oh yeah.
I'm a big love language person. And I think the secret to life is understanding that everyone has their own language by which they do everything in their life. And
Yeah.
so when I'm getting to know someone, it's almost like a fun game to better understand what is this person's communication style? How do they like to be communicated with? What do they need from me? How can I serve a specific role in their life? And I think that's become really interesting once you analyze really how humans operate. Like we all like the personality types, the campaigners, everyone within that. Is it the Myers-Briggs test? I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
I think like that, every single person also has their own unique way of approaching the world. And the
Right.
closer we get to understanding that person's worldview is the secret to life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love the love language too, because it's like you might have the best intentions and think that, you know what, Sophie, like I want to show my love to you, and I send you this like nice handwritten card, and I'm like, oh, I spent so much time writing that out. It was so intentional, because I'm a words of affirmation person. So I'm like, those words must mean so much to her. But although the sentiment, I'm sure you'll appreciate it, it doesn't really hit you in the same way of like if you were an act of service person, and it would have meant a lot more for me to spend my time in a different way. And so again, it comes back to understanding each other and realizing that like we project a lot of ourselves onto other people, whether it be personality types or love languages or views and opinions. And the more that you can be in that active listening position where you're not only listening actively, but also, like you said, analyzing, like, what is this person? Because it just gets back to like you're trying to have empathy for that person and understand their point of view. So I'm going to start playing that game too. That sounds fun.
Let me know how it goes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we've talked about a lot. I want to be, I feel like we could keep talking for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. So if you could leave people with like one thing, what would it be?
First of all, Kirsten, thank you for even wanting me to come on your show. I was really nervous because I'm someone who really is a perfectionist. I mean, even being on this Zoom screen, I'm like fixing my hair and I'm worried about how I look because I want to present myself in a certain way. But I think the one thing I would want people to know on the Imperfect podcast is that at the end of the day, you have a voice and you have a unique voice that was created in this world to do something that no one else can. And I think that's something I wish that I had known younger in my life, that I have a voice, my voice matters, and my voice deserves to be heard. And I think
Yes.
a lot of times we listen to those limiting beliefs and those voices in our head. And at the end of the day, I just hope that people can realize that you have had a voice all along and you don't need anyone else's permission to go out and use it.
Yeah. Amen. That is like the perfect way to end this. And I am so glad that you did get to that breakthrough where you found your voice and you realized it was powerful, because you are doing so much with that voice. And I am so excited to see where the conversationalist goes and where it is another few months from now, because you guys are just doing so many incredible things. And with that, where can people connect with you and stay plugged in to all the things that you guys are doing?
Of course. And Kirsten, thank you for those kind words. They mean more than you know. And if anyone wants to get more involved, just head to our website. It's just theconversationalist.com. You'll find everything you need to know. Join our community, start using your voice. And also, if anyone wants to talk, my DMs are open. I'm just at Sophie Beren on Instagram and just excited to meet anyone who comes our way.
Yeah, and she posts the most amazing, encouraging reels and content. So definitely check that out. I know my day is brighter when I see your stuff. So thank you for being you, and thank you for being with us today. Like I said, I could keep talking to you for hours.
Me too. So I hope we get to do this in
Yeah,
person soon.
I
And
know.
Kirsten, thank you for just creating a place to amplify voices. I'm really, really inspired by all that you do. And thank you for just giving that to me today because I really
Mm.
felt it and I'm so grateful to have been here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. I will see you next week.